Hello and welcome back to Goblin Gaming. Today we're going to be looking at a Spiritborn non-meta build that doesn't use Rod, Banished Lord's Talisman, or Ring of the Hunt. In fact, this build doesn't even use a generator or a core skill. Welcome to the Light Speed Rushing Claw build. This build is capable of speed farming 90s to 100s without any mythics and with only one unique. If we start slotting in mythics and change up a few skill choices, we'll be pretty easily able to push into the 110 plus range. Let's start off by taking a look at the speed variant, which you can see video playing of in the top left corner. Once we do switch over to the pushing variant discussion, we'll switch the video to that. Here's a quick explanation for how the build starts before we get into the nitty-gritty of it. We'll be using poison and fire damage with this build. The general idea is to stack poison damage constantly and then blow it up using the key passive. We'll use Soothsayer to add additional explosion damage as well as constant vulnerable. Rushing Claw will be used to speed through enemies, scout, group things up, and do a good chunk of damage. Finally, once they're grouped up via Rushing Claw in the Vortex room, we're going to use a combination of Soothsayer, all the damage we've applied so far, and the Spirit Hall primary to blow up the pack. It feels very similar to the Exploding Palm Monk from D3. Let's get into the specifics of how it all functions together now that you have a base idea. We'll be covering all the different variations and tips and tricks to make this build a little bit easier. In addition, it's very important to pay close attention to some of the stat allocations during the stat section, as they will make or break your build. Now let's start with the build itself, and then we'll look at the gear for it after that. Starting off in the primary section, we're going to put 5 points into Rock Splitter and 1 point into Enhanced Rock Splitter. We don't actually use any core skills or any generator skills, so these are pretty much wasted points, except Enhanced Rock Splitter will give us that 15% bonus all the time to our block. Block chance is going to give us scaling damage, so this is at least something to make use of those points. After we get past these first two worthless sections, we're going to go into the focus section. This is where our build starts. We'll get our first damage dealer with Toxic Skin. This does a lot of our damage. In fact, it's probably the majority of it. You want to put full 5 points into it, and then 1 into Enhanced Toxic Skin, as well as 1 into Measured Toxic Skin as well. You will notice that we do have a 8 out of 5 on this. That's because we're getting additional points through our gearing. We'll talk more about that in the gearing section. We're going to take 1 point into Focal Point, and the type of weapon you use matters quite a bit. I like to use a glaive because it gives you extra lucky hit chance. You could also use Quarterstaff for some additional block damage reduction. However, we're going to be dodging like 99% of the damage, and the only things we're going to be blocking are the few affixes that we miss with our dodge and that get through the filter. It's not going to be very much, so I think Glaive gives you a much better bonus. After that, you're going to put 3 points into Apex to give you a 9x damage multiplier, doubled versus elites, to anything that's vulnerable, and everything will always be vulnerable. We're going to put 2 points into Mirage to give us a standard 10% crit chance, pretty much consistently, because we're always going to be dodging things. And then we're going to put 3 points into Unrestrained Power for a 12x multiplier when we are unhindered or unstoppable. And do note that we are going to be 100% of the time unhindered due to Toxic Skin being up all the time. After this, if you want, you can put 3 points into Swift. It does help out a little bit during the early gearing stages of this build. Helps you make sure you always have charges of your Rushing Claw. That said, I found that once you get a good amount of gear and a decent amount of Paragon, this is no longer needed, so I dropped it in favor of putting some points down here into some damage scaling. Alright, let's move on to the defensive section. The defensive section is pretty cut and dry. You're going to put 1 point into Armored Hide and 1 point into Enhanced Armored Hide. That way, every time we hit the Armored Hide button, it's going to give us full resolve stacks. Resolve is going to be a main method of scaling our damage, so this is important. That gives us the maximum amount. We're going to put 1 point to Counterattack. Notice that when it is active, we will dodge all direct damage. This is going to be up 100% of the time. We're going to put a point into Enhanced Counterattack. Doesn't really matter that much. Gets us to Reinforced Counterattack though, which is going to give us a 30x multiplier, 6x for each close enemy, and since we're going to be vortexing things together pretty consistently, this will be up the large majority of the time. After that, we're going to put 5 points into Scourge to give us some poison damage on demand, but more importantly, to give us a damage multiplier on demand whenever we hit this button. It gives us 1% increased damage versus crowd control enemies, up to 50%. Things will be pretty much perpetually crowd controlled, but the key with this ability is to wait to hit it until after you vortex things together. That way, they're already CC'd, they don't run away, and you get your damage multiplier. Looking over at the passives, we're going to be taking Patient Guard for a 10% block chance, and then we're going to take a rank of Auspicious. Auspicious is going to give us some barrier over time when we don't take damage. Since we're dodging everything, we're not going to be taking damage, so this is just going to kind of accumulate. This, in combination with the runes that we're going to be using, are going to make sure that we have 100% barrier the large majority of the time. Moving down into the potency section, we're also going to get quite a bit of damage scaling. We're going to take 3 points into Resilient. This is going to give us a 15x maximum life multiplier whenever we hit our Armored Hide, which is going to equal damage as well as survivability. We're going to put 3 points into Behemoths. This will give us a 30x multiplier for our main skill Rushing Claw. The cooldown section doesn't really matter because we're always going to have it up anyway due to a combination of the different pieces of gear that we're going to use. Then we're going to put 3 points into Ravenous. Note that if you put 3 points into Swift, you're only going to be able to put 2 and 1 in here, but 3 points into Ravenous and 3 points into Oppressive. This will give us a 7.5x damage multiplier against enemies with our poison skills, and then a 15% multiplier whenever the enemy is healthy, which is more than 80% life. Oppressive is going to give us a 12x damage multiplier against crowd-controlled enemies, and things will be crowd-controlled pretty much all the time, other than bosses. You'll see why once we talk about the gearing. We're going to put 5 points into Rushing Claw. This is going to be our big damage dealer in combination with Toxic Skin. It does a good chunk of damage, and then once we put points into Enhanced Rushing Claw, it will cause enemies to take 10x increased damage from Rushing Claw every time they're hit by Rushing Claw. Since you can have Rushing Claw hit very, very rapidly, this will stack up to 80x very quickly. And then we're going to take Invasive Rushing Claw, which is going to allow us to consume charges of Ferocity in order to refresh our Rushing Claw stacks so we never run out. We're going to be using a number of different techs to make sure we stay capped on Ferocity, even though we're consuming this pretty regularly. Now this part's really huge. We're going to put 3 points into Potent, and then we're going to overcap it with our gearing. With just 3 points in there, it gives us a 30x multiplier, but once we start amping it up with a plus on our gear and then masterworking it, we can get all the way up to 90x for all damage you do off this one passive. That is absolutely massive. We're also going to take 3 points into Furnace, which is going to give us a 1.5x critical strike damage multiplier per stack of Ferocity. This is pretty significant. Moving down into the ultimate skill section, we're going to be putting 5 points into Hunter because this is a big damage dealer for us. We're going to put 1 point into Harmonious Hunter, which is going to overfill our Ferocity by 4 stacks and cause you to deal 100x increased damage to injured enemies for 8 seconds. Notice that it does not say it causes Hunter to deal 100x, it says it causes you to deal 100x. So that means it's a multiplier on all injured damage when they are injured, which is great. Then we're going to take a point into Exalted Hunter, which is going to give us a 40% chance to instantly reset this cooldown. This chance is halved after each consecutive reset, but this in combination with the glyph we're using means we're going to have Hunter up a large majority of the time. Last but not least, we're going to put a point into Noxious Resonance. This is our big damage multiplier for the build. Basically, it makes it so that every time we crit, it blows up the current poison damage on the target, and then applies 20% of that damage to all the enemies surrounding it. But it gets better than that. This damage is multiplied by 30x of your critical damage before being applied. Depending on gear level, this can be very significant. Currently, with fairly mid-level gear and mostly level glyphs, I'm getting a 624 damage multiplier. Oh, 725 damage multiplier now. I must have changed some gear. When I'm out of battle, and then once I get in battle and my resolve stacks stack up, it's much, much higher. It's 5,805x multiplier on her crit damage once I hit the Armored Hide button, and it stays that way throughout battle. Absolutely silly. We're constantly going to be reapplying our poison via Toxic Skin and Rushing Claw, and we're constantly going to be ticking for crit damage via Toxic Skin's 3rd mastery point. Basically, we're going to be blowing up and applying poison all the time. In addition to that, anytime we crit with our other abilities, it will also be blowing up the poison damage. We should have anywhere from 18 to 20 crit naturally without putting any points into it on our talent tree. Now, let's look at mercenaries. Okay, now we're going to be looking at our Spirit Hall and our mercenaries. For the Spirit Hall, we're going to be using primary with Jaguar. This reads, every 15th time you deal direct damage to an enemy with the Jaguar skill, unleash an additional 30x of the damage you deal in the last 0.5 seconds. Now normally, this is 15x, but due to a gearing thing we have, it changes from 15x to 30x. This is a huge damage boost. It also makes it so all skills are now considered Jaguar skills, so they'll benefit from the bonuses within our talent tree. It's great. Our secondary spirit is going to be the Jaguar spirit, and again, normally it gives us 1 ferocity whenever we hit an ability, and 1 maximum ferocity. But thanks to our helm that we're going to be wearing, it's going to change it into 2 max of ferocity and 2 stacks of ferocity whenever you kill an enemy or damage a boss. This will allow us to keep our rushing claws popping off all the time. As far as mercenaries go, we're going to be using Subo for the speed runs. He uses Molotov. This applies a AoE damage as well as a slow and a fire dot on enemies. Molotov is going to cause enemies to take 30x increased damage over time for you. That helps ramp up our poison damage. Snipe is a piercing shot that does a small amount of damage and knockback, but more importantly, Incendiary Bolt will make it so that whenever Snipe hits its primary target, he'll throw out a second Molotov cocktail, meaning you can have up to 60x increased damage over time on enemies from Subo. This is huge. In addition to that, he's also going to reveal all enemies in the area as well as any material deposits. This is nice quality of life for farming both in Helltides and pits, as they'll show you exactly where the enemies are. Super duper handy. As far as gems and runes, we're going to go over that next. Since we're dodging pretty much all the damage, we don't really need armor. So we're going to just go ahead and say, don't put any on. In the jewelry slots, we're going to run diamonds for some all resist, but we're not super concerned with capping it out. You will see that I don't even have my resistances capped out, and I have 0 armor, and I'm surviving just fine. When you go into a push variant, though, and you put on some mythics, it's going to give you more all resist, and there are a few extra points you can pick up in the paragon node if you really want to, but it's going to come at the cost of some damage. I haven't really found the need to cap it yet. I have 115 is the highest I've went, but I'm pretty sure I can go higher. Maybe once I go higher, I'll find a reason to cap it. For runes, we're going to be using a combination of Yule and Q, which is whenever you cast 6 cooldowns, you will invoke Earthen Bulwark from Druid. This is a really big shield, and since we're hitting our rushing claw quite frequently, and every single thing we do is a cooldown, this will be up pretty much all the time. Our second rune that we're going to take is going to be Zol and Cry, which is going to make it so whenever we invoke a skill from another class, i.e. Earthen Bulwark, we're going to cast Vortex. Every other time we invoke Earthen Bulwark, we're going to cast Vortex. So this is going to give us pretty consistent Vortex grouping. There may be a quicker way to do this with Vortex, but that's been the best I've found so far. If you guys have suggestions, do let me know. For Tormented bosses, you can switch that Vortex rune into the Max Life rune instead, as that will give you a good amount more damage. The Max Life rune is called Zal. There's also a crit rune you can put on for Tormented bosses if you want, but in my experience, they die really quickly anyway, so it doesn't matter. That said, I have leveled up my glyphs quite a bit on this character, and I got 260 Paragon, so that might be a factor. Alright. In the video description, you will see a mobalytics link. This is going to take you to the full Paragon board. If you want to just copy that one-to-one, feel free. But before you skip ahead, I've got a few things I need to talk to you about that are important to know with the Paragon board so that you have a baseline of what you're looking for when you're doing gearing. And we'll go into the gearing too, though. Don't worry. Some important things to know are that Colossus gives us a damage multiplier per stack of Resolve. So we're going to want to stack as much Resolve as we can. Twist's Shield gives a multiplier by stacking Health and Barrier. Convergence scales damage based on the level of our Bane and Wildfire glyphs combined, and will provide no benefit until we start leveling up those glyphs. Also important to note is the board order. Board order goes as follows: Basic Board, Convergence, Vicious Shield, Drive, and Revealing as our last board. With that out of the way, stick around for the in-depth breakdown or skip ahead to stat priorities using the links in the description down below. Looking at the starter board first, we'll grab all 4 yellow nodes and any elite or max HP nodes on this board, and then we're going to slot in Wildfire. Wildfire will scale our damage of all of our Jaguar skills, but more importantly, it will give us a cooldown reduction consistently, which is great. Once it's fully leveled up, we'll be getting a 150 multiplier, or 160 multiplier, plus a 10.4x fire damage multiplier. This is fan-freaking-tastic. Our first board we're going to pick up after that. Maybe if I expand it, that'll work. Okay. First board that we're going to pick up after that is going to be the Convergence board. On the Convergence board, this node will scale our damage based on elemental damage. Please note that non-physical damage does not work with this node as it is bugged in a bad way. In order to get the full benefit from this legendary node, you have to have a combined 150% elemental damage between fire and poisoned, via Wildfire and Bane glyphs respectively. I would wait to spec towards this point until you have at least level 46 on these 2 glyphs, as before that it won't really give you all that much damage, and it's an extra 5 paragon points that you could put somewhere else really. On the blue and yellow nodes with this tree, we're going to be gaining 19.5% all resist, 130 raw damage, 160 non-physical damage, i.e. poison and fire, but it doesn't count towards convergence, and 7.5% attack speed, as well as 26% max life for a massive boost in max life and damage. For the glyph on this board, we're going to be using the Bane glyph. The Bane glyph is going to give us a lot of raw additive damage, as well as a 10.4x poison damage multiplier when it is fully leveled up. Moving on to our next board after that, we're going to be looking at the Vicious Shield board. Vicious Shield's legendary node will give us a % multiplier based on your max life that you have with Barrier. To get full benefit from this, you want 100% Barrier at all times. We're going to accomplish this through Earthen Bulwark Rune and Auspicious Passive. Please note though that this node is currently bugged and giving way more damage than is intended. It's adding base life in addition to max life when it's calculating the damage, causing just absolutely absurd numbers. I would expect that this will get fixed in the fairly near future, and as a result, all Spiritborn builds that are using this will likely be brought down significantly in power level, possibly even down to the power level of the other builds, but there are a number of other things that are bugged, so I think we're still going to be stronger than all the other classes and builds, but do note that this will see a significant downshift in damage once they do make that correction. For yellow and blue nodes, we're going to be getting 8% maximum life, 27% damage reduction with Barrier, which is pretty much all the time, 37.5% vulnerable damage, 70% additional damage with Barrier, 36% Barrier generation, 15% lucky hit, 10 lightning resist, and 85% crit strike damage, which will be further scaled with the glyph that we're going to be using. For the glyph on this build, we're going to be using Spirit. Spirit provides a large amount of raw critical strike damage, as well as an elite damage multiplier when hitting legendary status. This will be our stat dump glyph once we finish filling out the rest of the board and we have extra paragon points to put in wherever. We're just going to put dexterity points in here all over the place. As you can see, I'm currently at 80 out of 40 dex, and it's giving me a large amount of critical strike damage. You could also choose to put in a few extra points into resistances before you do this. There are several nodes throughout the tree where I don't take resistances that you could take if you really want to, but each point of dexterity is a pretty significant amount of critical strike damage. We go from 333 to 355 with 1 point of dexterity on a paragon node. That's pretty crazy. All right, next up, we're going to be looking over at the drive board. To get there, we have to swing back and then go back upwards here. And this is our drive board. The drive legendary node will give us the 3x multiplier for every 10 meters traveled, stacking up to 30x. This means that as you're jumping back and forth with Rush and Claw, it'll be up all the time. However, if you do end up jamming yourself into a wall over and over again, like you used to do with the Raycore build in D3, it will not give you this bonus, so please keep that in mind and try your best to be bouncing back and forth instead. This, however, also means that this node has a slight ramp-up time before the damage gets fully online. For yellow nodes on this board, we'll be getting 87.5% vulnerable damage, 65% raw damage, 45% crit damage, 2% actual crit, 21% movement speed, and 36% damage reduction when we're moving, which is pretty much all the time, and then an additional 26% max life, once again scaling that vicious shield and our survivability. Note that we are skipping the lucky hit chance and dodge in the top corner because we have quite a bit of lucky hit already, and this would be a large number of points, 10 paragon points that we would waste to get up there for just a simple 5% lucky hit bonus. The dodge is wasted since we're always dodging all the time anyway, so we're skipping this cluster. Last but not least, we'll be moving on to the revealing board. Revealing legendary node gives a 30x multiplier to any crowd-controlled enemies. This counts for all CC types like freeze, stun, etc. In addition, it will also provide a ton of CC with a 30% lucky hit chance proc to knock enemies down. We should have about 28% lucky hit chance naturally between our board and gear, so that's fairly often that we'll be hitting with lucky hits, so it's a lot of crowd control it adds in. For yellow nodes on this board, we're going to be getting 52% damage versus CC targets, 37.5% vulnerable damage, 22.5% lucky hit chance, 15% attack speed, and 10% max life. With a mythic setup, we'll also unlock a few additional bonuses via stats on the yellow nodes. We're going to get 4 additional % max life, 25% vulnerable damage, and 35% CC damage. For the glyph on this, we're going to be using fitness. Fitness is going to give us a large amount of raw crit damage, as well as a crit damage multiplier to our build. This is great. Oh, you know what, actually, I think earlier I said that Spirit gives crit damage multiplier. It doesn't. It gives elite damage multiplier. My bad. But yeah, Fitness does give a crit strike damage multiplier. So that's pretty good. Now let's go ahead and move on to talking about stat priorities. For stat priorities in general, you're going to want to get max health and dexterity on pretty much every piece of gear, unless I say otherwise. We also want our GA pip to be on max health for almost all the pieces of gear, but there are a couple of exceptions that are really important for the build. We also want to, when we're tempering, get max resolve on our gear. We want to make sure we're getting 2, not 1 max resolve. It will make a big difference once we start masterworking it, and it will make a huge difference on our damage. Use reset scrolls if necessary to make sure you get 2 max resolve on the pieces that use resolve. First off, the helmet is going to be Loyalty's Mantle. You want a good secondary on this, so as close to 60% as possible, as this will give you cooldown reduction for your spirit, or for your Jaguar spirit build abilities. So Rushing Claw, Hunter, and Counterattack, this gave us a 60% cooldown reduction on those abilities. It's absolutely huge. Getting a good secondary here is very nice. As far as the masterworking goes, you really want to get it probably on all stats or damage reduction. Masterworking on movement speed is not great. I know that's what I have here, but it's not great. And velocity is a completely dead stat, so don't masterwork into that. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but we want to make sure we're using amethysts for barrier generation and our other pieces of armor. On our chest, the third stat that we're looking for is plus armored hide for the most damage, or plus all resist for the most damage reduction, depending on your preference. For tempers, go for a lucky hit chance to freeze and max resolve. This lucky hit chance to freeze will be good for making sure that things stay perpetually crowd controlled and for proccing one of our passives over here that we'll talk about in just a moment. As far as masterworking goes, you want to get ideally 3 stacks of resolve masterworked, but 2 stacks of resolve and 1 stack of max life works as well. As far as GA goes on this, ideally you want to have maximum life as the GA, not dexterity, but dexterity is fine if you can't find a max life to start. For our gloves, the third stat that we're going to be looking for is attack speed. You will want to triple masterwork this to get as close as possible to the 100% cap for bucket 1. If you're unaware of what the different buckets are, I'll throw up an image in just a second so you can see those. But essentially, you can get up to 100% attack speed from bucket 1, and you can get up to 100% attack speed for bucket 2 for a combined 200%. I'll throw that image up in just a second here, but do note that if you're masterworking and you'll get 2 on the attack speed and you get 1 on vortex size, that works as well, or 2 on attack speed, 1 on max life, that works too. You ideally want to get a GA on the maximum life. I'm going to pause my recording here for a second. You'll see the gameplay skip, but I just realized I didn't make the graphic yet, so I'm going to make that graphic and we'll be right back. Alright, here are the damage buckets. I actually got this from Max Roll, so if you need to refer to it later, it is listed there, or you can always come back to the video. We can't use Moonrise because we're not using basic attacks, so that's out the window. I don't use Elixir of Advantage because I use the max HP elixir. We don't use Andario's Visage or Ring of Starless Skies. We do, however, use Hysteria, which is one of the reinforcement abilities of the mercenary we're going to, or I'm sorry, we do use Bloodlust, which is the reinforcement ability of the mercenary that we're going to be using, so that's nice. And then we do get a number of attack speed nodes through the Paragon board. Currently, my attack speed before the Bloodlust kicks in on bucket 1 is 47%, but then once my mercenary reinforce goes off, it goes up by an additional 30%, so that's going to put us at 77% attack speed, so we're not quite there. I need to get more masterworks on my attack speed on my gloves and my ring, but I'll get there eventually. My gear's not perfect yet. Okay, now let's move on from attack speed. Let me minimize that picture for us real quick. Alrighty, there we go. Took me a second to find it. Sorry, the boss kill got cut out there, but it'll loop back. You'll see it again in a second. Alright, for pants, we're wanting the pip ideally to be on maximum life. Not what I have, but you know, it is what it is. For the third stat point, you're going to be wanting to find all resist. That's just going to give you a little bit more toughness for those few times where you don't dodge the attack. But for masterworking, you're going to want masterwork max resolve 3 times, as I have here. Sometimes that can be hard to hit, so 2 into masterwork there and 1 into vortex size works as well. But you'll notice that it's 13 resolve if you hit 3, and it's only 7 resolve if you hit 2. So it's a pretty significant difference between hitting 2 and 3. So that is something to keep in mind. As far as the tempers go on this, we're going to be grabbing vortex size and, oh sorry, the other masterwork you want is maximum life, not vortex size, sorry. My bad. The tempers on this that you're going to want are vortex size and then resolve at 2, obviously, which you're going to then masterwork. On the boots, this one is one of the most important slots for this build. I do not have a good pair of it yet, but hopefully I will in the future. You ideally want to get your masterwork pip on toxic skin, not movement speed, because this will give you a baseline for toxic skin to start, and then once you start masterworking it, it's going to give you even more ranks, which is going to amp up that poison damage that you're applying all the time a pretty significant amount. You also, of course, want dexterity and maximum life. These boots are not good. I do have another pair of boots I'm going to work towards getting there. I just ran out of some materials. I want to get this video out, so it is what it is. I just still don't have a toxic skin pipped one. I've been trying to buy one on Diablo trade, but nobody's responding, so we'll get there eventually. On the weapon, again, remember you want to have a glaive because it's going to give you extra lucky hit chance via that node on the talent tree. But for the third stat, you're going to want crit damage or damage over time. I hit damage over time first, so I just kept that. Masterworks, you're going to want, or sorry, tempers, you're going to want to add on crit strike damage and chance for Rushing Claw to deal double damage. Jagbire damage might also be good, or Centipede damage might also be good. I'm not entirely sure what's the best here, but I've been doing Rushing Claw deals double damage and it seems to be working pretty well so far. Masterwork on this, you want to hit all 3 onto whatever your weapon temper is. In my case here is Rushing Claw, but it can be sometimes hard to hit, so if you do get like 2 on Rushing Claw and 1 on Dexterity, or 2 on Rushing Claw and 1 on Maximum Life, that's okay too. Really, there aren't any bad tempers here, so whatever works. It's not as important as the Resolve stacking. On our necklace, however, it's another very important piece of gear. You want to make sure you get a pipped version of the Potent node. Remember, that's the one that gives us our big 100x damage multiplier for everything we do once we masterwork it. I have 2 masterworks on it here. I'm hoping I'll be able to get a 3rd one, but I have 2 masterworks and a resolve at the moment, which is perfectly fine too, because it does a lot of damage through resolve scaling. I think getting 3 onto Potent would be better, but I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to go through and look at the math later. This piece of gear is very poorly optimized. Ideally, you want Dexterity, Max Life, and Potent on it, but I just haven't found a piece of gear that's like that yet, so this is what I'm rolling with at the moment. The Lucky Hit chance isn't exactly wasted, because we're going to want to be rocking Lucky Hit for a number of things anyway, so no big deal. On the ring, we're going to want to get the 3rd stat as critical strike damage or attack speed, depending on if you're at the cap yet or not. And then if you're doing the attack speed, you ideally want all 3 masterworks to hit onto attack speed so you can hit that cap. If you're not doing attack speed, you want your tempers to hit the critical strike damage or the hunter cooldown reduction. Max life is also okay, but those 2 will give you a lot of extra flexibility in your playstyle. All right, that's it for excuse me, that's it for gear priorities. Now let's take a look at aspects. Aspect-wise, we're going to be grabbing the the Rallying Reversal aspect. This is going to give us Ferocity generation whenever we crowd control or stagger a boss. Basically, it's going to make it so we don't run out of Ferocity when we're consuming it with our Rushing Claw. This in combination with the secondary on our Loyalties Mantle give us a good amount of cooldown reduction for our Rushing Claw, so we can always have 4 stacks. And we can always have stacks up. On the chest, you have a number of different options. I went with Aspect of Apprehension, which is going to give us a 39x multiplier whenever we fear anything, i.e. whenever we hit our Scourge. It's great, but there are other options as well. You can take Binding Morass, which is going to give you a 20x multiplier constantly, and you're going to slow things around you. Kind of cool. Or you can take the Soil Power aspect to apply a Mystic Circle that will add a good amount of poison damage whenever you hit a Centipede skill, which you're going to be hitting all the time anyway. And we're going to be using the Jaguar Plains Power Circle anyway, so we're going to be playing around circles either way, so that might also be a really good option. Honestly, I'm not sure which is better, that or the Fear one. I just happen to be rolling with the Fear one at the moment. You should note that with the Soil one, though, there is currently a bug with that where it's removing damage resist. You know, those purple beam guys you see in the dungeon? It's like straight up removing that from enemies. So it's definitely a bug, and that's why I didn't use it in the gameplay footage. I would expect it to be fixed in the near future. In addition to the chest piece, we're going to run 2 other utility aspects. One on the pants. This is going to be the Temporal Incisions aspect, which gives you Rushing Claw, extends the duration of your incarnate skills by 1 second up to 8 seconds. 10 is the max roll on it. I have an 8-second roll. It is what it is. Even with the 8-second roll, I pretty much keep 100% uptime on my incarnate skills, so it's good enough for me. Last, for a utility aspect, we're going to be using the Duelist aspect on our boots. This gives us 5 additional max ferocity, which gives us quite a bit of damage and a damage multiplier off of our Plains Power aspect that we're going to be talking about here in a second. You could alternatively run the Fear is always, or the Scourge is always active around you thing if you're running the Apprehension rune to just keep a constant 50x multiplier going while you're doing your speedruns. I don't personally like that, but you could certainly do that if you wanted to. We'll be using 3 offensive aspects for this build: our gloves, our boots, and one of our rings. So let's look at the gloves first. Gloves, we're going to be using the Plains Power aspect. This is going to give you a lucky hit chance to generate a mystic circle. This is going to be the Jaguar's Mystic Circle, which empowers you to be at maximum ferocity as long as you are in the circle and it is up. But more importantly, it's going to give you a damage multiplier per stack of ferocity. With my current build the way it is, I'm getting a 3.5% multiplier, but you can get all the way up to 4.1 depending on your roll on it. This could give you, with 15 stacks of ferocity, a whopping 70-something X multiplier on your damage, which is pretty huge. This is also why it's important to run duelists on your boots, because that gives you an extra 5x ferocity, which gives you even more damage from the circle. This helps a ton with dealing with bosses, because bosses are kind of our kryptonite, and this is the biggest way that we have to deal with bosses. In combination with our other damage aspect, which is Fel Soothsayer, this is going to make things vulnerable whenever we hit any incarnate skill. Our incarnate skills are Counterattack, Armored Hide, and Toxic Skin. We're going to be hitting those all the time, so we're going to always be applying Vulnerable. But more importantly, whenever we kill anything, it's going to do a multiplier on the killing blow damage. Now, since we're generally killing mobs with the Spirit Hall proc or the Poison Explosion from our key passive, these numbers are pretty large to begin with. So when one enemy pops, it will oftentimes pop another one for additional damage. This is going to cause a cascading chaining effect, giving you a large amount of damage if you have multiple mobs. Particularly helpful when bosses summon 2 or 3 additional mobs, because then you can blow up the boss that much quicker. Very, very nice. It's also super, super handy for when we're going through the pit in general, because we're going to be grouping enemies up on top of each other via vortex all the time. And so you're going to get really big pops of this. This is kind of what makes it feel like the Exploding Palm Monk. And then last but not least, we're going to be taking Redirected Force, which is giving us a huge damage multiplier on our critical strike damage based on our block chance. Do note that this is uncapped block chance, so even though it says on your talent sheet you only have 100% block chance, via the various aspects and other things we have in our build, we're going to go over 100%, and that's going to give us a large amount of damage multiplier for our critical strike chance. Now let's look at defensive aspects. We only have one. It's going to be on our necklace, which will increase its power by 50%. We're going to gain 15% block chance. Excuse me. 15% block chance per stack of resolve, since we're going to have lots of stacks of resolve. Currently I have 34, I think, in the video. That's going to give us a ton of block chance, which then is going to translate into not only damage reduction, but also a ton of extra damage via the Redirected Force aspect. That's why we're putting that on our weapon. Currently, in the video that I'm playing, I have slightly average gear, but I'm gaining 16,596% crit damage, which is then multiplied by 5,805x via our Poison passive. You can kind of see how they work together to create some really big numbers. Then those numbers blow up using the Jaguar Spirit Hall to make an even bigger number. So it all just kind of chains and reacts together. It's pretty cool. This is the same tech that most builds are currently using. We're just applying it in a very different way from most builds. So, all right, that said, I'm going to pause my recording here, get some footage queued up for a push run, and then we're going to talk about the pushing variants to end this video. Right, so as I was getting ready to record the footage, I realized I can't record footage and at the same time have my video pause. So we'll talk about what we would do for it, and then I'll actually just do a run for you guys to see. Sorry about that, it'll make the video a little bit longer, but you'll get the basic idea. Okay, so for the pushing variant, if you're not using mythic gear, what you're going to want to do is come over to the occultist, and you're going to want to change your aspect from whatever you're using on your chest into the assimilation aspect. This is going to give you stacking fortify whenever you dodge attacks. You're going to be dodging attacks quite frequently, so you will be pretty much perpetually fortified. This means you're going to take another 10% damage reduction, or 10% less damage, which is super helpful when you happen to not dodge attacks. In addition to this, you're going to want to go to your mercenary den, and you're going to want to switch your mercenary. So we're going to go ahead and go do that real quick. Okay, so for the pushing mercenary, we're going to want to grab right here. He gives us a nice smattering of different bonuses, but his main ability will stomp and slow enemies in the area, which is kind of okay. Nothing big. He'll give us some unstoppable. Again, not that big of a deal. But most importantly, he's going to give us some all resist, which will help fill out our resistances for when we are trying to push. Since we didn't really focus on it when we were gearing, this will get us a little bit closer to the caps. Again, if you want to put a few more points in on the paragon board, you can do that. I haven't found it necessary yet, but who knows, maybe I will in the future. Then we're going to take Bastion. Again, it's just going to give us Unstoppable, not a big deal. But more importantly, it's going to redirect 90% of the damage that would be down to us to him whenever we're inside his protective circle. And then we're also going to get a 15x damage multiplier on top for like damage received from enemies, and then an additional 25x multiplier for damage we do if we jump from inside the circle. Not easy to control, but you know, sometimes it's up, sometimes it's not. No big deal. Main reason we switched to him is for the all resist. Alright, so that's if you're doing the non-mythic version. If you're doing the mythic version, simply slap on a Shaco's Harlequin's Crest. It's going to give us a large amount of max life, a lot of cooldown reduction, and then 4 additional skill ranks into, into all of our active abilities, which will bring our Rushing Claw up to 9 out of 5, giving us some extra damage, which is very nice. The other mythic that we're going to slap on is Shroud of False Death, which is going to give us a lot of all stats, a ton of maximum life, but most importantly, the implicit +1 to all passives will give us a ton of extra damage because it'll give us 1 to every single passive, even ones that we didn't take before, which can help amp up your damage that much more. Plus it gives 1 to all the different things you took, pushing you that much further up in damage. Very, very helpful. Okay, with that said, let's go ahead and go do a pushing run of 110. I'm pretty sure I can go higher, but I know I've cleared that before, so let's go give that a shot. The only time I've ever really had problems is if the Echo on the pit boss is Echo of Lilith, because she has like a one-shot mechanic that I can't seem to dodge because I'm stupid. But let's go ahead and get down into a pit. 110. And you're going to want to use the Fortitude Potion and the Max Life Incense. Not really going to be commentating much as I play. I'm just going to be focusing on playing, and my throat is starting to hurt. So I'm going to mute my mic. Oh, I just realized I usually actually switch a different talent point as well to give it a little bit more survivability. I'll show you guys here in a second. Oh, I just saw a trillion hit. We're going to go ahead and restart this real quick and make that change. My bad, team, my bad. The other thing you're going to want to do is take those points, the extra points out of Scourge, because we don't need that little bit of poison damage on the Scourge, because most of our poison damage is going to be coming from the toxic skin anyway. And we're going to invest those points into the Perseverance passive to give us just a ton of extra damage reduction. Since we're sitting at 30-some resolve stacks, this is going to give us like 60% damage reduction, so that's pretty huge. All right, let's go. Let's hop back in again. This is actually like the worst layout map you can get because it's really tight corridors and hallways. So this will be interesting. Took a wrong turn at Albuquerque. Alrighty, that's it for the build guide. Hopefully you guys made it this far. If you did, give yourselves a big pat on the back, because that was a long video. If you guys would prefer me to do a TLDR shortened version of this, please let me know, and I will do a much shorter abbreviated version, and people can always refer back to this main one later if they wish to. Thanks for being here. Leave a like, favorite, share, subscribe. Put a lot of effort into this and came up with this build from scratch on my own, so pretty proud of it. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. I certainly do. See you guys later.